Coming up next on WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton, and Badmus is an immigration attorney. He's going to talk about Texas Governor Greg Abbott yesterday vowed to sign a bill banning sanctuary cities in Texas. How she feel about that, and what are some of the legal hurdles he's about to run into? She'll tell us next on WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton. WSBA News Time, 8:01. Welcome back to WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton. Yesterday, Texas Governor Greg Abbott vowed to sign a bill banning sanctuary cities in Texas. And it brings up some rather interesting questions. For help on that this morning, Ann Badmus, who's an immigration attorney, has been with us before here some time ago, but she's back with us this morning to talk about that. Ann, good to have you on the show this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
Great to have you back. I think you were with us about a year or two ago, and always interesting to have you on. There's some interesting questions that come out of this whole sanctuary city thing. And, for instance, why should a municipality be forced to verify a person's immigration status when that is a federal responsibility? I guess that's one of the first things that comes out of the gate, right?
Well, I think that is one of the concerns of the local and state police departments, certainly. So, yes, that's a question, or that's part of the reasons for some of the policies there. Mainly, the focus is on community policing and being able to have the communications with the community without being seen as an arm of immigration enforcement. So I suppose that's one of the reasons why.
Let me approach this from a layman's point of view, and I'll let you approach it from an attorney's point of view. And maybe we can both find some common sense in it as well. There are a lot of us that sit down and look at this and we say, okay, we think we ought to be a nation of laws. We don't have sanctuary cities, for example, for bank robbers or rapists or murderers or anything like that. And yet we somehow have this concept that having a sanctuary city is okay for people who are illegal if they can make it there. It's kind of like, I remember playing hide and seek, and if you could make it to a safe base, you were okay, and as long as you were touching that, you were fine. It fundamentally seems to go against the rule of law. You're a person that practices law. Your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, first of all, we really need to have a clear understanding of what a sanctuary city is. And with respect to law enforcement, I think the term is pretty much incorrect as to what's actually happening with that policy. Most of the policies actually don't say that someone makes it to our city and you will never be subject to immigration enforcement from the federal government. It's just basically, my understanding is that the local police are not going to be the ones seeking out someone who's undocumented and certainly trying to report them to the federal authorities. Now, if they do arrest someone and the fingerprints are taken, which is always the case, that is shared with the federal government, and the federal government always has the opportunity to detain that person through its own means.
You were very nice about how you said that, but let me come back. In other words, you're saying that the police are not going to enforce the law. In other words, if they see somebody, they're not going to question their status or anything like that. In other words, if they have some reason to believe that a person, well, for example, they arrest a person, let's say they stop them for a speeding ticket, okay, and they ask for, the proper documentation and so forth that they normally ask, and all of a sudden this person says, well, I'm not really, a citizen or anything like that. Will police look the other way on that because that person is not a known law violator, therefore somehow it's okay for them to be there? In other words, that's unlawful. I mean, that's according to federal law. You are not supposed to be here illegally, and yet at the same time, we're saying, yeah, but the nuance really is we're looking the other way, unless you have a record of having committed some terrible acts or being a law violator, right?
Well, it is a law. I mean, there are what we call jurisdictions, certainly. I understand it from the legal standpoint, from the local policing and community policies, is that their focus is on local violations or criminal violations. Yes, someone may not be here lawfully. That actually is an administrative matter. It's not even, in most cases, a criminal act. So the police don't believe, in many cases, in some of these policies, that it's their job to enforce it. It's the job of the federal government to enforce it.
But by the same token, and I see what has happened here. We have this really interesting, what do I want to say, hole in the system. We saw Arizona some years ago with their particular bill that they put out there. It said we will assist the federal government in finding illegal aliens when we stop them for speeding tickets and things like that, and we will help to uphold the U.S. Code. And they cited line and verse the U.S. Code. President Obama and the Justice Department sued them, and comes back then, and the Supreme Court upholds that and says, no, it's the federal jurisdiction that takes care of this, and so we really don't need Arizona's help. So in other words, if the federal jurisdiction decides not to do this and not to really do a good job at this, then no one's going to do a good job at it, because what you're saying is the sanctuary cities, the law enforcement there, aren't really going to help because they can hide behind the idea, well, it's the federal jurisdiction, it's not our jurisdiction. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, what I'm saying is there's cooperation to the extent that the local police feel they can cooperate, which is providing information as people are arrested. I'm sure everyone knows that, police have a lot of obligations, and I don't think their concern is that they're not to enforce law if that is actually the requirement. But it is not a requirement at this point. And so, that's where the policy is.
When do we get to a point where we look at illegal immigration in a totally different way than anything else? We say, well, if a person got here and managed to stay here for a long time, establish roots, establish a family, that's somehow okay. But, if someone does something else that's unlawful and they manage to dodge the law for 5 years or so forth, that's not okay. I mean, you might say, well, that's different, and maybe it is in some respects. And in other respects, we say law is made for a reason, is it not? I mean, you're a person that practices law. The assumption by most of us out here on Main Street is that, we're supposed to be carrying out those laws and that they were made for a reason. If they were made for no reason at all, then why do we make them at all?
Well, I guess I would probably say, based on my practice, and I see the law being enforced every day when I'm working with my clients, many who are here legally and trying to maintain that, and those who are not and trying to obtain legal status. I guess I would not agree that the law is not being enforced. Maybe to the sense that there are so many people who are here without legal status, it may look like it's not being enforced, but I believe, on a daily basis that it is being enforced. So there's a lot of policies and a lot of reasons for it. I think it's something that Congress certainly has to take up and really decide what our immigration policies need to be today, and that's going to need to be a conversation that I think we haven't really taken up the way we should.
Let me take a quick break. Can you stick with me for about 5 minutes yet?
Sure.
We'll be right back. Ian Badmus, who's an immigration attorney, with us here this morning, talking about sanctuary cities and immigration at large. And it is a big conversation in the country, and I think she's right that Congress is going to have to deal with that. But again, we always want to keep people in mind, and yet at the same time, do we not also keep the people who are being affected by it in mind in the country? We seem to look at it always from the point of view of the person coming in. What about the person that already is here? We'll ask more about that from within when we come back here on WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton. WSBA News Time is 8:15.
WSBA.
Welcome back to WSBA Morning News with Gary Sutton. Ian Badmus is an immigration attorney. We're talking about Texas Governor Greg Abbott vowing to sign a bill banning sanctuary cities in Texas. And I want to ask you a question. Is the governor right or wrong in what he's saying about banning sanctuary cities in Texas?
Well, I guess, I really don't feel qualified to give a opinion on that. But certainly,
obviously, it's going to make your job more interesting if he does that. Am I right?
In some ways, certainly, if there is a ban in the sense that there's a requirement for police officers, coming upon anyone and asking about their status, certainly it will make a difference. How do we
maintain that we are a nation of laws, and yet we somehow have this? I guess there are two words: what, de jure, and what's the other one? De facto.
Okay.
How do we have this de facto? Thank you for helping me. That's why I'm not a lawyer. This de facto understanding that, well, yeah, but on some things we let it slide. How do we operate a country like that? I'm just interested. And you said you deal with some people who are, here illegally and they're trying to somehow become legal. Why isn't it just? And excuse me for being a simpleton for a moment. Just come through the front door. And you're more than welcome. And that way you have all the rights to life, liberty, and property the rest of us have. What am I missing there?
You mean why isn't it that way? Or
why if we espouse to be a nation of laws, which obviously you're in the business of making sure laws are carried out and protected and so forth, and rights are protected as well. Why do we somehow have this, and I'm using the word de facto, understanding that, well, we do, but, we kind of let these go because they're really not that important and it helps somebody out and we can get a few extra voters somewhere. We get some people working cheaper and, it's just kind of the way things have gone. How do we get into some middle ground there where people are going to be happy with that?
Well, those are some of the concerns that you expressed. I mean, those are all concerns that we all should look at. Again, I go back to Congress looking at, whenever making a law, looking at all the interests that are out there. As you mentioned, interests of people who are in the United States, interests of people who are interested in coming into the United States. And that all, again, has to be a conversation where we look at all the sides and figure out a balance. And it's not going to be perfect, but certainly, something that most can be comfortable with and really bring us into this century in terms of competing globally as well.
By the same token, though, if we listen to some of the people out there say we want open borders, why have a country? I mean, I guess that's what I'm kind of getting around to. Why have a country if we hear people say, well, we want just open borders? Because that's essentially what people are asking for right now, is it saying that, okay, I see where President Obama just moved 6,000 kids who came here illegally. Since 2014, only 45% of the cases have been really taken care of. That means 55% of them out there are not being taken care of and not having any resolution to them. And we're having those kids moved out to communities around the country. It just doesn't sound like the way things are supposed to be. There should be some more order to it than that. And yet it's an ideology that's being practiced instead of enforcing the law.
Well, again, Gary, I would say I see enforcement. It's slow. And the fact that we have people who haven't finished going through that process doesn't mean they're not going through a process. It just means, unfortunately, it is a slow process. I don't necessarily agree that there is not any enforcement or people are looking the other way. I just think that it's a process that is very complicated and takes quite a bit of time in many cases.
Well, I'm not saying there's no enforcement. What I'm saying is if I see 55% of the cases have not been enforced since 2014, I mean, how long does it take?
Well, that's a question that many of my clients say who are going through the system itself. How long does it take? Because it is unfortunately a very slow system, whether you're applying legally or you are going through the removal process. And
I agree with you on that. By the way, I think that needs to be streamlined.
Yeah.
But
I agree as well.
Yeah, I think somewhere along the line there, we need to make this a quicker system, a way to get people here in a much more expeditious way. Do you think that we ought to have rules in this country on how many people come here? And, at what point in time are there too many people here at any one particular time to assimilate into our culture for all the various services and things that we offer?
Well, I think there currently are rules in terms of how people can. The legal system is pretty restrictive in terms of the numbers of people who can come here and the relationships and the sponsorships that are necessary for people to come here. But we also have to keep in mind that there are benefits of immigration as well. It's not all a drain on our system, at least in my opinion. There are benefits as well, and there are many people who contribute, bring lots of skills and actually jobs to the U.S. So we want to keep all that in balance and really make sure that we're too restrictive.
And I would agree with you, and I would suggest that people who come here legally, that probably is a pretty good wash. People who come here illegally, is that contribution, does that outweigh the drain that they put on society? I guess that would be the question I would ask, and I guess that's the question that has to ride out there for people like Congress to maybe answer in the long run, right?
Exactly.
Hey, and I really appreciate taking the time to talk about this with me this morning. Appreciate your point of view, and thank you for being with us. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Certainly. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Take care. I appreciate it. Ann Badmus, attorney, immigration attorney. She and I have obviously different views on this.